pretty good gig. Good evening, everybody. We are in Exodus chapter 11 and 12 tonight. Last week was going to be, or on Sunday was going to be chapter 11, but Dave was going to be doing his talk. That got moved to next Sunday. So this coming Sunday, Dave's going to be talking. And so I figured we'd just combine chapter 11 and chapter 12 together tonight just to discuss. And then when we get back to we'll skip over the next lesson, and maybe I might just kind of do a little recap next Wednesday when we have normal class again, just to keep on pace with where the kids are at and everything. So Dave will be taking over on Sunday, and then we'll get back to the lessons on the following Wednesday. Let's start with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this day that you've allowed us to get together and study your word. Thank you for the many blessings we have here at Brownsburg. We thank you for the members here. We thank you for this church, the facility that we are blessed to have here, and the opportunities we have to study your word together. Please watch over us this evening. Please be with everyone in each of the classes. Pray that we continue to grow in the knowledge of you and in our love for one another. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So last we were talking in chapter 10. We looked at the locusts. We looked at the darkness as the 8th and 9th plagues descended upon Egypt. And we have started to see this build up to this final plague that has been talked about in terms of the death of the firstborn that was going to be leveled on the people of Egypt. And so we'll read through chapter 11 real briefly. It's kind of a short chapter, setting the stage for chapter 12 and God stretching out his hand over Egypt. So let's start in chapter 11, verse 1. It said, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Yet one plague more I will bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterward he will go from here. When he lets you go, he will drive you away completely. Speak now in the hearing of the people that they ask every man of his neighbor and every woman of her neighbor for silver and gold jewelry.' And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people. So Moses said, 'Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out in the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on the throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle. There shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there has never been nor ever will be again. But not a dog shall growl against any of the people of Israel, either man or beast, that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. And all these your servants shall come down to me and bow down to me, saying, Get out, you and all the people who follow you, and after that I will go out.' And he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Pharaoh will not listen to you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt.' Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go out of his land." All right, chapter 11 here sets the stage for the final plague. God telling Moses what to tell to Pharaoh about what's coming, and also what Moses and the people should expect after this, what's going to happen. Not just the plague itself, but also what's going to be the fallout of this. So what are some of the things from this chapter? We'll spend a little bit of time before we get into chapter 12, which is quite lengthy. What are some things that God tells Moses are about to happen from the plague itself, and then some of the events surrounding it? What's about to take place? All right, let's start in chapter 11, verse 1, and we'll read this over again. All right. Come on, what happens? What happens in this chapter? What's God foretelling is going to happen? What's the 10th plague? Death of the firstborn, right? And how absolute is that, right? Death of Pharaoh's son, death to the slave girl's son, death to every cattle's firstborn, right? From the highest to the lowest, the entire span of the people of Egypt, all are going to lose their firstborn, right? This absolute judgment being leveled here, this sign from the greatest to the lowest. It will be absolute God's plague on the people of Egypt, which he's told them is coming. This is, he's told Moses this has been coming, and so now we're at that doorstep of this event occurring. What about Israel? We've talked about in chapters past about the distinction made in certain plagues about how Israel was separated out from the people of Egypt, but how are they going to be distinguished here in chapter 11 and with the final plague? Does anyone? Yeah, good terminology here, a good visual. I mean, I'm not a good writer, I wouldn't say, but I get the idea. When dogs can, get upset over almost anything now, right? Some dogs are, super lazy, and then some dogs get crazy over, butterflies or anything. And in the midst of what God says will be in verse 6, right? There shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there has never been, nor ever will be again, right? So that's verse 6. Seems kind of bad, right? That's kind of a bad thing to hear. The worst that's ever been or ever will be in the land of Egypt. And then it compares that to, all right, all the way from Pharaoh down to the lowest of the low, the slaves and, the cattle and the animals, they're going to be screaming and crying because they're the death that's going to take place. And then Israel on the other side, it's going to be so calm and peaceful, you're not even going to have an upset dog. You're not going to have a dog barking or restless or anything, right? So the absolute separation here, when we talked about, the distinction between God's people and Egypt, right? Here greater than anything else. Not just light and darkness and, peace is not touched by the plague, but, not even the fear or the unrest of what's going on around them is going to touch these people, is how God is going to protect them versus his outstretched hand being on the Egyptians, right? So either man or beast. And then we hear that phrase again in chapter 11, verse 7, right? Theme of this book. What is this all for? What is this plague for? What is this meant to show? So they know what? Yeah, and that difference is the Lord, right? The difference is that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel, and he even goes on to say again, that you may know I am the Lord, right? We've had that show up multiple times throughout this book, but the distinction between Egypt and Israel is not the people, right? It is their God. The God of Israel versus the gods of Egypt. The God, whether that be Pharaoh or Ra or Hep or Osiris or whatever those gods are, right? God has been tearing down the credibility of each of these gods through all these plagues, right? He has been showing Pharaoh and revealing to Pharaoh his complete subjection in all matters compared to like God's sovereignty versus what Pharaoh thought was his sovereignty, and God has shown complete dominion and power over everything Pharaoh once thought was his. And yet we've talked about Pharaoh's hard-heartedness. We've talked about how he has continued to, in the face of overwhelming evidence, continue to defy God and rebel against God. And we had a good discussion last Wednesday about, he's broken, but when we talk about God giving, hardening his heart, it's like Pharaoh never wanted to, break. He wants to keep defying God, but the overwhelming evidence has broken him, and yet God gives him the strength to continue on with his rebellious desires. He keeps giving him the strength to turn away from God. Not that he makes him turn away from God, but Pharaoh wants to rebel. He wants to defy God. And so God just continues to give him the strength to do it. Right? So we've seen that Pharaoh's really been at breaking points, and he's, asked Moses to forgive him, and he's recognized, hey, I've sinned, and he said other things like that. And yet God has hardened his heart to where, hey, you want to rebel, you want to defy me, even though you're seeing these evidences, you want to continue to do your own thing. And God has strengthened or hardened his heart to continue to allow him to do that, to allow him to do what he wants. And we've talked about how, like in Romans, he's given himself over to his own lust, and God has allowed him to, this is what you wanted. Eventually, I give you over to it, right? I've given you over to those desires, those lusts. And so now we're seeing the culmination of this defiance is just building to this ultimate climax here in chapter 12. Go ahead, John. Yeah. Yeah, and when you say that, though, even like for us, right, that is the pinnacle of the wealthiest, most powerful man in the world is worthless in comparison to God, right? Like that is the story. You do have the pinnacle of man versus God, and you see what the difference is, right? What man thinks man is capable of and is powerful over versus God who actually has the power, right? So that, among other things of, the layers of messaging that God has been exhibiting through these chapters to us and have been written down for us, amongst the messaging of knowing who the Lord is, one of those things is, I mentioned last week, is, there is a God and I am not him, right? And that message is going to be continually beaten over Pharaoh's head. And we've talked about how he still defied God, even though that messaging has continued to be going over and over again to him. Yeah. He's got one more card to play here. And he knows how it's going to finish out. He knows that Pharaoh, after this, is going to let the people go. And just so we can kind of move to chapter 12 and get started reading there. One of the things that is brought up that we've talked about earlier before is at the start of this chapter, the people are going to leave with more than what they, the typical group of slaves would normally leave with, right? They're going to leave with the possessions of the Egyptians, which we've talked about has been told by God to Moses and at the burning bush in chapter 3. I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and when you go, you shall not go empty, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor silver and gold jewelry and clothing, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. So we see that in chapter 11. We're going to see it in chapter 12 brought up. But even this was brought up before then, right? This has been told about since Genesis. So in Genesis chapter 15, I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. So God's told them from, when he made the promises many years ago to Abraham, you're going to be in slavery. Your people are going to be enslaved. You're going to come out of this a great nation, not just in number, but also in terms of wealth, in terms of these possessions. you're going to leave with great possessions as well. And so God has told them about this. And as we've talked about, this book being God fulfilling those promises, right? And ultimately the Bible is, culminates in Jesus fulfilling that last promise he made to Abraham in terms of all the nations being blessed. But we see these other promises being fulfilled here, the great nation, and then ultimately we'll see the land also being fulfilled later on. So just seeing God work and seeing these plans to come to fruition is cool for us to see as we go chapter by chapter, and we're getting to this point of how things are going to work out. Anybody have any other comments on chapter 11? Katrina? Mm-hmm. The what? You mean like how are they not all dead? I don't know. I thought of that too. I don't really know how, I guess while I believe there was utter devastation to the cattle, I don't know of, did he kill if God destroyed and killed everything. So I don't know if that. I I don't know exactly how logistically it worked. I guess I'm of the belief how the reserves of, if they had other places beyond this area to get cattle from, because I could think the same way of, well, when the locusts came in and ate everything, did they all starve? Why didn't they all starve? So it's, I don't know exactly taking those words and being like, okay, if all the cattle are dead and then all the greenery gets eaten and all the other plagues they've already had, how are they not just all dead in a lot of, so I don't know all the ways, but I thought of that too. I was just like, yeah, they all are dead anyway, so what's the significance of these other cattle losing their firstborn? It's like they've already all died. But yeah, it's right. Yeah, so the ones that didn't fear God, they left the cattle out in the fields and they got destroyed. Yeah, that could be it too as well. That's a good point. Yeah, I don't know, because you just think at this point, what is there to take from Egypt? It just seems like at this point they would almost have nothing. Now, I get none of the plagues really attack the jewelry and the gold and so forth, but, you almost think man, they're kind of in ruins now. It's you'd almost think visually, are they little more than looking like slaves themselves, just been battered by all these plagues? I don't know, but yeah, I don't. It's kind of interesting to think about, and I mean, even we were talking about last week of what did it look like being in Goshen and then seeing, I think John mentioned seeing the rest of Egypt in darkness, visual, some of these stuff I don't have an answer for. It's curious, and but somehow it it is kind of that idea of they just keep getting back up, and ultimately yeah, God was going to take even more from them at the end, so there had to be something for the people to take. But yeah, that's a good thought. Yeah, yeah. I think he knew the reaction of this. I mean, we already see that he had moments of capitulating a little bit, but he wouldn't go the full way. And then now this is going to be like, okay, no restrictions, like just leave. Spoiler alert, but Gary? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and then also, but even with that, and I know I'm going down the route, it's just like somebody showing up there and be like, yeah, they're covered in frogs. Like, are we not turning around, right? Like, but yeah, it's just, but yeah, that's where we got frog legs. Crazy. We can eat these things. Go ahead, Jeff. Yeah, we get, I don't know, a lot of questions, but they had some cows. They had some cows left, I guess. Long story short, go ahead, John. Yeah. Yeah. There's purposes for it. Absolutely. Any more comments on chapter 11? Let's get some reading into chapter 12 here. Bit of a lengthy chapter. Let's go ahead and read through verse 32, and then we'll kind of pause there. So chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons. According to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire. With unleavened bread and bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted, its head with its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you. Then I will strike the land of Egypt. This day shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations, as a statute forever. You shall keep it as a feast. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven out of your houses, for if anyone eats what is leavened from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day you shall hold a holy assembly, and on the 7th day a holy assembly. No work shall be done on these days, but what everyone needs to eat, that alone may be prepared be prepared by you. And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your hosts out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as a statute forever. In the first month, from the 14th day of the month at the evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven is to be found in your houses. If anyone eats what is leavened, that person will be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a sojourner or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your dwelling places you shall eat unleavened bread. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go and select lambs for yourselves according to your clans, and kill the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and touch the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. None of you shall go out of the door of this house until the morning, for the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to enter your houses to strike you. You shall observe this rite as a statute for you and for your sons forever. And when you come to the land that the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall keep this service. And when your children say to you, What do you mean by this service? You shall say, It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, for he has passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt, when he struck the Egyptians but spared our houses. And the people bowed their heads and worshipped. Then the people of Israel went and did so, as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did. At midnight the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where someone was not dead. Then he summoned Moses and Aaron by night and said, Up, go out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go, serve the Lord as you have said. Take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also. All right. So, a lot of stuff in here about the Passover and what they're intending to do in the midst of, this 10th plague that's going to happen. So, what sticks out? I'll just kind of leave this as open. If you want to questions or comments on the plague, or questions or comments on the Passover feast or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I might not know anything to answer, but, you can at least ask it. But what stands out to you in this first part of the reading before we get to the people actually exiting the land? What sticks out? Yeah, definitely kind of a strange thing. I think I get that idea as well. Besides just what we read, it's kind of a strange series of events. But also, I think it leads to what is mentioned here. God's telling them of just like, hey, your kids are going to ask, why do we do this? And you'll tell them why, right? Like, it is also done in a way that just it brings about a curiosity from your children. Your children will be curious as to why you do this thing, and you'll tell them, this was when the Lord passed over us, right? All of this feeding back into, and we talked about this last class of, hey, the importance and how this story of the Exodus is really the start of these oral traditions being passed down of like, hey, make sure to pass these on to your kids so that they will know who God is. And, we talked last week about, not falling into unbelief and all the things that happen when we don't pass on these things to our children and we don't inform the next generation about who God is. And then, you can even see that outside the family structure, but just in culture to begin with. When you get away from people knowing about who God is, what you lead to a culture that does not reflect God, right? And so that has been a repeated pattern of, every culture leads to this. When God is not continually brought up in the focal point of the instruction of the next generation, people go away from God. When man goes their own way, that way leads to sin, that leads to death, and to wicked things. Go ahead, John. yeah, there's a purpose behind all of it. So, yeah, John mentioned, dressed a certain way, eating certain things, in a certain place. The place that you're in has to be decorated a certain way, and by decoration, I guess the outer door. But yeah, there's a specific set of rules in place, and those rules have meaning, and those meanings, are meant to draw to mind certain things for these people. So, what is what's one of those in terms of like some of the imagery of what happens, some of the rules that they have to do? Was there anything that stuck out of like either you like this imagery or you're like confused? Why would they do this? Why does God tell them to do this? Is there significance in that? Anything that stuck out from? I mean, there's a lot in there, so I won't list them all out. But whether it's about the lamb, the doors, the bread, the belts, Eric. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think kind of with that, Eric's point of, we've had God has distinguished, yeah, yes, that is right. I don't know why it feels wrong grammatically, but has distinguished has distinguished Israel from Egypt and the other plagues. But this is the first time we've seen where they are called upon to do something, right? They are called upon to obey these requirements in order for the angel to pass over. And Eric mentioned it wasn't a matter of like the angel passes over the Israelite houses and then goes into just the Egyptian house. He passes over the houses without the blood, right? He passes over the houses with the blood and goes into the ones without it. And so it is no longer just a distinguishment between Egypt and the Israelites. It's from those that are a part of this, that obey, that are a part of this covenant. And he gets into later in the chapter about, who's going to be a part of the covenant, who's going to follow these things, and those who are circumcised and so forth. And so now it's who's choosing to be a part of God's people and then who isn't, right? So they are going to be a part of this. They have to choose. They have to kill this lamb. They have to do all these things. They have to be ready to leave. They have to be eating the unleavened bread. And so all these things are now put on them to respond to who God is, what he's asked them to do. And he tells them, like, hey, I'm going to deliver you. I'm showing you who I am. Now I need you to do this. I'm asking you to do this. And will you respond? Jeff, and then John, and then Megan. And Yeah, I would assume, leadership does this, and just like in John 9, when, it talks about, the blind man's parents were afraid that if they spoke up and defended their son, that they would be put out. I don't think once they said it, they'd be like, all right, let's put ourselves out. It's, the leadership's going to do it. And same kind of thing here if you disregard the commandments. Go ahead, John. Yeah. Yeah, the first fast food meal ever recorded right here. Sandals strapped, belts tightened. You know how miserable it would be to have a meal with your belt tightened? Like, have you ever seen someone do that? You'd say, what a crazy person. I'm not eating with that guy. But yeah, got to be ready. They had to be ready. Megan? Yeah, definitely you're right on with the comparisons to Christ. There's several of them. Um, you know, the lamb, the spotless lamb, the blood required, taking from slavery to freedom, taken from sin to freedom. Heck, even the no broken bones on the lambs. Same thing with John 19. Uh, you know, those kind of same imagery with Jesus, right? And so the blood here justifying or protecting or saving, to Passover, and then, Hebrews 9, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. There is no deliverance. It was that blood that protected them. Go ahead, Chris. Yeah, I noticed that too. The phrasing of, Chris mentioned the idea of like God was there protecting the people from the angel of death entering. It wasn't just like, oh, heat-seeking missile to the non-blood. It was, I'm coming for everything, and then the God stops them on behalf of their obedience, right? On behalf of them putting the blood on the doorpost, God's like, you're not entering this house. Like, you're not. And so I thought that was kind of interesting when I read it. Go ahead, Chris. Yeah, and then that, obviously the tie-in there with Christ, obviously, of like, you know, by Christ taking the cup of wrath himself, then we don't take it, right? So there is the blood that's been shed. Now God, like, he has his wrath, has to have that. God is a just God. He has to bring judgment against sin, and Christ takes the judgment for us, right? So the imagery there of like Christ is his son, right? The firstborn of all, and he takes our place, and he takes in this situation as well, like the imagery with the Passover. The Passover was coming for the firstborn. Israel is called the firstborn, God's firstborn, right? And so they are protected by God, and ultimately God is going to go even further and deliver his own firstborn son, his own son, for their sake to deliver all of us. So, yeah, all of this, and obviously Jesus does all this on the night and institutes his own memorial with the Passover feast. And so it is what's cool about reading the Bible. You get to those points as opposed to just, chopping it up and just jumping episode to episode all the time. Is like, we got to remember this story, this grand tale that's played out and building up to Christ and all the stuff that this nation has gone through and all the things that God has done to show his people who he is. And he's going, and it's been the theme of this book. It's going to be the theme of every book, of God being there for his people. We turn away from, Israel turns away from God continuing to reach back out to try and deliver us from our own mistakes, our own sins, our own temptations. And then the greatest deliverance of this, even more than from the Egyptians, is us from sin. What greater empire is there than Egypt? It's the empire of sin, and how pervasive that has been through every empire and every time, right? So while this is a truly great, vast, powerful enemy, sin, death, is the ultimate enemy. And so now you get to those later books and you get to the New Testament, and it talks about how, the last enemy to be defeated is death. And you get to 1 Corinthians 15 and you hear the phrase, "Oh, death, where is your victory? Oh, death, where is your sting?" Right? It's meant to feel like the buildup of many, many times over the years, over the generations, over the centuries and millennium, of the struggle of people to turn to God, to stay away from sin, to choose God over choosing themselves. And always this cloud and this dreary truth of death hanging over us, and that our sin leads to death. And yet Jesus conquers that, right? And these people have been living in slavery and suffering and have been beaten and, mistreated for many, many years. And now there's this deliverance, right? So they can appreciate this true salvation offered by God. And we have to look at it the same way with our deliverance through Jesus Christ, right? We're supposed to see those connections. We're supposed to draw on that. And so if it doesn't move you, if it doesn't resonate with you, it's on us. Like, I'm not reading deep enough. I'm not studying this enough. It isn't supposed to be catchphrases of just us, reading John 3:16 or a one-off verse. Because, then it does just kind of become a cliched. I frame that and I put it on my wall. If you want a rainbow, you got to deal with the rain and blah, 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 like whatever cheesy stuff. Like, that's not what the Bible is. It's not just a list of pick-me-ups, right? It's a message of deliverance, of love. But you have to understand the lengths that God has gone to deliver us, and how he's shown it to his people over and over again, so we can know that he makes these promises and he keeps these promises. And then you get to these passages where it talks about, this God who cannot lie, right, keeps these things. And he goes to these lengths to show that he is truthful and that we can trust in him. And so I just love, maybe I'm going on a rant here with it, but that's why I just love these books. And when I'm getting into Genesis and Exodus more than I have before, you get into it because you see, like, oh, this is the start of him telling them who he is, and this is what he's going to reference back to. This is what you'll recall. This is what you'll tell your kids about. And I know we talked about that a little bit last week, of just like, when you have those special moments we live in life, and like, I'm going to tell my kids when that happened. Mine are all simple, insignificant stuff, but it's just like, I'm going to tell them that one time I hit that impossible basketball shot at that fair and won a stuffed animal or whatever. Like, nobody wins because they're cheating you. They've definitely, twisted those rims. They're smaller than regulation size. But, something like that. Hopefully yours is better than mine, but I've at least got that. Go ahead, John, please take us somewhere different. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, for sure. I got to be honest. Like reading through the chapter, there was a lot of stuff I feel like I just overlooked before or didn't notice. So, and I read it like 3 times through. Uh, most of my study was just having to read chapter 12, which is a bit of a trudge, but there is a lot in there. And, it does repeat some stuff and go over some things multiple times, which is good because I definitely, struggled on reading comprehension sometimes. But God gives us, a few repeats when we need it. Yeah, the Kaufmans. Good answer, Ken. Good answer. I think it's kind of what I took it as what we've been talking about for, you know, past weeks of just like all of this is each of these plagues, and then ultimately this one is a true dominance over each god of Egypt, which it's funny giving that terminology, even though like they're not gods because they're not real. There's one God, but it using that phrasing of like, yeah, whatever it's the god with the frog head that represents fertility, or the god of the Nile, or the god of the sun, like he is executing judgment on his dominance, his sovereignty on all these things, and their lack of power. That's how I took that phrase. Ken? Yeah, I thought that was kind of like an interesting throw in, right? Just based on like, you know, all their interactions they've had, and they've clearly had interactions where Pharaoh's, been extremely angry and thrown him out, or said like, I'm, never going to see you again. And then, but one thing I do feel like Pharaoh has shown, and with the hard-heartedness and all that, he does know that Moses has God's ear. Like he knows that Moses has God's ear to like take these. Hey, when he wanted to get some of those plagues stopped, he's like, please pray to God, stop these things. And, even last chapter, he does confess his sin for a moment, and he does have this moment of, a bit of a contrite heart to a certain extent, or a regret-ish feel, however you want to phrase it. But I do think he at least has shown repeatedly, like, I know Moses is a speaker for God, or this God, or however you want to view it from his perspective. And so he does at least know, like, if I do want something done, I go ask Moses to ask God about it. So that's kind of how I took that. But it was kind of a weird, like, bless me as you're leaving, and I've done all these terrible things to you for. But yeah, go ahead, Katrina. Yeah, not. Yeah. I don't know if I would have said cool, but yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that phrase, there will be a cry in Egypt such as never been heard or will be heard again. Like that is, true, right? There's never been anything like that, and there won't be anything like that they've ever experienced again. And so, yeah, it is a terrible scene to imagine, but also kind of shows what it took to get to where, what God was saying, with a strong hand he will drive them out. Like this is what his hard heart required to actually break it, And so this is what God has been doing to show his power over these gods and to show to his people and to Egypt and to everyone who he is. Thanks, everybody, for your comments. Thanks, everybody, for skipping out on Tyler's class, willingly. He's actually back there, tried to teach, but he told me that he just texted us. No, thanks, everybody, for your participation. Be safe going home and try and stay warm. And Dave will be here on Sunday, so let's all be here to listen to his great